Breaking news. The FBI's number one most wanted man, Ryan Weddy, is finally in custody of the U.S. Department of Justice. He's been on the run for quite a while. He's been the most wanted. He's been number one on the most wanted list for about a year-ish. The bounty on his head from the government went from $10 million to $15 million in 2025. It was a real all-hands-on-deck effort by multiple law enforcement agencies around the globe, the FBI, the RCMP in Canada, Interpol, and the Mexican officials as well. He was taken into custody in Mexico. He's now in Los Angeles. He was immediately put on a plane and taken back to the U.S. on U.S. soil, where his case, Operation Giant Slalom, originally dropped in 2024. There's been some superseding indictments. He's been a fugitive, I think, for about roughly a decade, but has only been really in the crosshairs in terms of having that number one on the most wanted list tag for roughly 6 months to a year. A lot of mixed messages coming out in terms of what happened here. We're going to try to break it down and fill you in as best as we can. We've reached out to all of our sources in the government, DOJ, FBI, DEA, some of our trusted sources in the cartel reporting world down in Mexico. We're going to try to give you the most streamlined and most likely scenario about what happened here. Weddy really blasted onto the scene in terms of infamy at a level few see, but it was a meteoric rise in terms of that infamy, and it started in the Olympics. He was an Olympic snowboarder for Team Canada in 2002. After his Olympic career and his snowboarding career came to an end, he transitioned quickly into the drug game. Started out small, got bigger, went from weed to coke, got hooked up with some Russian gangsters, got hooked up with some Middle Eastern gangsters, got pinched, had to go to a U.S. prison for a couple years. In that prison down in Texas, hooked up with a bunch of cartel guys. And at this exact same time, the Rizzuto mob was crumbling from within. Hell's Angels were going through their own legal problems, and there was this opening in Montreal. Weddy was initially an Ontario guy that had spent his teen years in his early 20s in British Columbia and Vancouver, but Montreal is that's the major leagues, and in terms of organized crime, that's the epicenter. And he found himself a space in there in the mid 2000s, and was hooked up directly with the Sinaloa cartel, and was off and running. Operation Giant Slalom finally hit pay dirt in 2024. So how did Weddy come to be now a ward of the state? And this is one of the biggest narcotics trafficking busts in North American history. There are 5 murders connected to this case, at least one of a federal witness that ties in Montreal crime lord Atna Anna, aka Tupac. And this was it wasn't rags to riches. because Ryan Wedding came from an upper middle class family, but it was a very unusual transformation into a narco kingpin of global scope and scale. And with the FBI comparing him to El Chapo and Pablo, and even if I think that's a bit of an exaggeration, but that's neither here nor there. This guy was a major player, is a major player. And there are a lot of different stories right now being circulated about how he came into custody, how he came to be a guest of Uncle Sam. And he could very well be facing the death penalty. This is, capital case. But I sense that there's a lot more than meets the eye here. That's part of my analysis. That's part of my sourcing here. And that this was a very coordinated effort. This wasn't, as some are portraying it to be, Ryan Wedding all of a sudden on Friday, January 23rd, decides to just pop up at the U.S. Embassy and turn himself in. It's a lot more complicated than that. And I think as everything plays out and as the layers of this unfold, we'll see. But there are, at least three narratives that are competing in regards to how this all went down. You also have a scenario that, frankly, it's just, it's theater of the absurd, frankly, to think that FBI Chief Kash Patel just happened to be at the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City when Ryan Wedding walks through the front door. And that's what they're telling you. That's what the official position of the U.S. government is right now. And that's farcical. So there's a lot of tea leaves you can read here into just that fact that Kash Patel was in Mexico City when Wedding went into custody. So first, we have what the initial report was, that he turned himself in. You have Patel and FBI, DOJ doing a victory lap. It's a real feather in their cap, to their credit, for finally getting a hold of him, whether they apprehended him or negotiated his apprehension and turnover, or whether he just showed up at their front doorstep. Either way, it is a win for Trump's DOJ. He was the number one most wanted man in the world. So you have that first narrative, which frankly is false, that he just showed up and willingly turned himself over to the federal authorities in the U.S. at the U.S. Embassy in Mexico. And that was part of the early reporting. And I'm sure that will be part of the reporting in some places, at least for the short term. And again, I just want to say that's not what happened. And that's why you get it here from the OG pod, and you get it from our elite and exclusive sourcing, and we're going to give it to you raw and unadulterated truth. We cut through all that fat, all that noise, all the propaganda. So I want to go through what I think most likely has happened, and I'm gonna source it, and then I've also backed up some of that sourcing with some other small tidbits. But Vanity Fair, giving credit where credit is due, came out and reported that Wedding had been in some form of custody with Mexican authorities for days prior to his turning himself in on Friday, and that the Mexican authorities, I guess with Wedding's complicity, or weddings representatives complicity, engaging in I think it was described as like an intense negotiation or like a lengthy back and forth about how he was going to get from Mexican authority custody to the FBI and the Patel's guys. Then you had what I think is the most likely scenario here, and it's coming from a Mexican journalist named Carlos Lamola, and he reports, and he reports all in Spanish, but he's reporting that this whole thing was a negotiation between Patel, DOJ, and FBI, and wedding, that it's been going on for weeks, that it's involved the federales in Mexico, but that it was possibly initiated by wedding, but that this was a weeks in the making negotiation to have wedding into U.S. custody right now, and that Kash Patel and his inner circle weren't just coincidentally in Mexico City for other business. They were there to, from what I've spoken to people, and this part hasn't been reported, but I'm confident in my reporting here, he was there to close the deal. The head honcho, the number one guy outside of Donald Trump here, Kash Patel, head of the FBI, he was the one quarterbacking these negotiations, and who knows what parameters there were in this surrender or apprehension. I don't know how Patel and them are trumpeting it as a apprehension. Other people are saying he turned himself in. Again, there's a lot of gray here and a lot of nuance to this. But he's got a lot to give on both sides, or I would say on all sides in the North American drug landscape and the drug economy, for somebody that operated in all three major areas of North America: Canada, the United States, and Mexico. And he changed his MO and some of his order of operation from when he first got into the coke game in the mid 2000s, late 2000s, when he was moving the drugs through Arizona, that would then make its way up to Canada. This pipeline that he had with Sinaloa, when he got out of prison, went right from Mexico to California. This was a huge operation that Wedding had successfully organized and executed, and for at least a sizable portion of time, had the trust of the top people in the Sinaloa cartel, where they gave him his own kind of group within a group, and made him Sinaloa's point man in all of Canada and parts of the U.S. as well. Doing some research, talking to people that know have said to me that Sinaloa has become enamored with Canada. That as much money as they can move the dope for when they smuggle it into the U.S. or into Europe, they can make more money. In Canada, Wedding provided that the opportunity to find their way into Canada at a time, as we mentioned, strategically, with a time of unrest and uncertainty in the Canadian underworld, which in turn made for unrest and uncertainty in the supply chain. In the drug world, Vito Rizzuto had just died. There was a war. the crime family was engulfed in flames. You had changeovers in leadership at the Hells Angels level. They were dealing with their own legal issues. And there was a vacuum. And Wedding found his way into that vacuum with the backing of Sinaloa, and he kept his operation pretty lean and mean. So now, in this particular case, he got busted by the head of the narcotics organized crime group in L.A. by a woman, I believe her name was Hannah Monroe. She's a superstar. But he was busted in his first coke bust by a guy named Brett Kalina, and we're going to have Brett on the podcast in the next week, hopefully, and he's going to tell the story of taking down Ryan Wedding in the 2000s in his first coke case before he hooked up with Sinaloa, and he'll be able to give some insight too. But this is a lot more complicated than I'm sure anybody could ever imagine. And what the future holds here, who knows? There's a lot of valuable information I'm sure Ryan Wedding has to offer if he was willing to offer it, if he was willing to unlock the vault. I suspect, and again, talking to people that I've spoken, people that know a lot more than I do, that all of these machinations that eventually resulted in today's bringing of Ryan Wedding into custody by the U.S. DOJ was that Wedding felt backed against the wall. He was a headache for a lot of very dangerous people. And he was somebody that had been part of other headaches getting remedied via homicides. He knew that murder and bloodshed is orchestrated with impunity by the cartels, and that they would kill him without thinking twice. He had become a real, he'd become radioactive for everybody around him, everybody that was hiding him. He became too infamous and too wanted. And you're talking about a guy that's going to have a difficult time blending in on the run. He's 6'4", reddish brown hair. He looks like a former or current professional athlete. So when you're running around countries where everybody else is dark-skinned and small, and you're very light-skinned, almost gingered and tall, people remember you. And then especially if you're a American who operates with empowerment by the cartel, that's currency. That makes you infamous, not just publicly, but within the cartel, where you have these cartels are multinational conglomerate size. You're talking tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people that are employed, but you are, whether you're very powerful, mid-level powerful, or not so powerful, people are going to, it's difficult to not notice that there is a 6'4" Canadian ex-Olympian snowboarder running in those circles. You're gonna, that's gonna elicit attention and scrutiny. So there's also something I want to talk about in regards to how I'm told wedding was located. And I think this is where it gets to some of the semantics about whether he turned himself in, whether he was apprehended. It's like, there's scenarios like this in organized crime. There's scenarios like this in business. There's scenarios like this in professional sports or in the world of entertainment. You can be a leader, and whether you left by choice or you left because you were pushed out or forced out can be a matter of terminology. I resigned, but you were on the verge of getting fired. So in this regard, I think that based on people I spoke to in my sourcing here, Wedding had been discovered. They knew where he was. I inaccurately or incorrectly, I had said, I think on a pod, we've been covering this for the last handful of months, search for Ryan Wedding. And I commented that I believe that all the searching they were doing in Mexico was misguided because most likely it was no longer in Mexico. I said I bet I'd heard from rumors and people that I trust that he was in the Middle East. Maybe he was at some point, but it looks like I was off on that. And he was in, most likely in Mexico most of the time. He was on the run, and he got discovered, or he got the Mexican authorities, and working with FBI, DEA, and RCMP, from what I can understand, were able to track him because of his sexual conquests. The women that he was sleeping with, he had a girlfriend and another girlfriend, or a wife and a girlfriend. But besides those two women, one I believe was Colombian and one was Mexican. He was using high-end escort services wherever he was, and he trusted some madams, women that would feed him other women with his hideouts. And I think most likely they tracked him down based on one of these madams giving him up, and it was just a matter of negotiating how it was all going to look. I think there was some performative aspects of this, some theatrical aspects of this, because Kash Patel and Donald Trump need to, and they deserve it. They deserve credit, I think, just like Obama deserved credit when he got Bin Laden. When you're going after the world's most wanted man, and you achieve it, however you achieve it, it's a head on the wall, and it's something to that you can puff your chest out about and use on your resume and your list of achievements. And I'm sure that's what Patel and Trump are going to do. So they needed to orchestrate the way the perp walk look, and it's very he gets off the plane, he's surrounded by 1,000 different people protecting him. So this is there was a lot of it that seemed like it was designed for PR purposes, but when you get past that, I think it's pretty. I don't want to say it's certain. That would be. I don't think it's certain, but I think there's a good chance that Wedding is about to, already has started to play ball and save himself, because just going into regular BOP as is right now, if what I'm speculating is true, if he thinks that the Sinaloa guys that had been hiding him and that he had been doing business with were of the opinion that he's gotten too hot for them and that they might want to get rid of him. Going into general population in BOP in California, probably not the safest place. A lot of cartel hitmen in those places. They can probably hit you maybe easier inside than they could outside. It's a capital case. He ordered the murder of a federal witness. Doesn't have a lot of options. And how this all rolled out and came together, I think we're going to find out that there was a lot more coordination and a lot more negotiation in terms of the deal and pointing fingers at probably maybe some names we've heard of, possibly some Hells Angels, some guys in the Wolf Pack, maybe. I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm just saying he has a lot to give if he was so inclined. Either way, he's locked up right now. He's in a U.S. prison, in a U.S. detention facility. He'll be arraigned this upcoming week. We'll see what he pleads, but there's a lot of this story yet to be written, or at least maybe has been written, and we haven't seen the drafts or the final prints. But I think there's a lot that we don't know here, and a lot of speculation. But what I'm certain is that he didn't just show up at the embassy and turn himself in. And I will rely on reporting coming out of Mexico that this was a lengthy negotiation between Mexican authorities, his people, and DOJ in the U.S. to get him in handcuffs and get him to do a perp walk on a tarmac that gets headlines around the world, and it has. So I'll keep everybody updated with what I hear going forward. We'll have a wedding in court this upcoming week. We'll see him. They don't allow cameras in federal court, but I'm sure there'll be a lot of reporting there. And this all comes on the heels of a week ago. It appeared that he had opened an Instagram account and was taunting the FBI. Maybe that was all a ruse. He put one picture, only a couple pictures, but he got, 20,000 people in 3 days to follow him. And he's posting pictures of $1 million watches and jewelry. And, when they raided some of his spots back late last year, they found, $40 million worth of cars, $400 million. I forgot what the number of luxury car vehicles. And this guy lived large, all the toys, lived like you would think international narco kingpin would live. You just don't necessarily think that guy comes from that archetype comes from an upper middle class family in the suburb of Vancouver, and whose family is traveling around the country, around the world, watching him snowboard as a teenager. He came from the opposite of meager beginnings, but he wanted to be a criminal, and he didn't just become a criminal. He became the number one most wanted man on the planet. Now he's in U.S. custody. Again, we'll when it comes to this kind of stuff, especially when it's tied into Canada or the FBI, major narcotics trafficking, Hells Angels, Italian mob, bikers, obviously if they're Hells Angels. We got the best sourcing. We got moles all around the continent on both sides of the law, feeding us information on a regular basis so we can dissect it, vet it, confirm it, and bring it to you. And you're going to be getting stuff from us. We're way in front of the curve on a lot of this stuff that you're going to be getting from us months before you're going to get it from the mainstream media. So we love doing it. We love bringing it to you. And we thank everybody that is an OG Pod supporter. Please like, share, and subscribe. Original Gangsters Podcast. Go check out our Patreon members only. We got some new stuff going on there. Check out our companion web magazine, The Gangster Report. Scott Burnstein, Original Gangsters Podcast, uncovering the underworld, one city, one region, one country, one continent at a time. I'm out.